Vero and Renee Trevere from Preservation Connecticut. They're going to talk to us all about historic preservation in your community. Before they get started, I'm going to hand things off to my colleague Jim at Sustainable CT for a couple housekeeping announcements.
Howdy, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm Jim Hunt. I'm the Communications Director here at Sustainable CT. And we just have a quick announcement before we start. This coffee hour is being recorded, of course, for those who couldn't be here. And for those who are here and would like to review anything we covered today, we'll be able to find this and all of our coffee hours, along with recordings of workshops, certification help, newsletter previews, and a lot more on our YouTube channel. Search YouTube for Sustainable CT. You'll find us there. I'll also put the link in the chat in just a moment. While you're there, be sure to check out this month's episode of The Impact, a Sustainable CT podcast. It's connected. We like to connect these things up. New episodes are available on the 15th of each month. That's today. It's on YouTube at sustainablecT.org and wherever you get your podcasts. For this month's show, we have a great conversation with Mallory Howard. Mallory is the assistant curator at the Mark Twain House and Museum, where we will be having our 2025 spring into summer celebration next month. And it was a lot of fun talking to her about Mark Twain and his Hartford home and all things Hartford. Speaking of which, a reminder that we will be having our 2025 spring into summer celebration at the Mark Twain House and Museum in Hartford on June 4th from 4 to 7 p.m. We hope you can join us. Some of our favorite partners will be tabling at the event, which is very cool. It will honor our spring certified communities. We'll introduce our newest cohort of Sustainable CT Fellows. Yay, Fellows. We'll have a panel discussion on how to create effective sustainability teams, and tours of the Twain House are available too. So please register soon. Again, I'll put that link in too in just a second. Please register soon because the space is limited, and it truly is. So if you want to go, definitely register as soon as you can. Thank you for your time. All that's out of the way. Back to Kate.
Thanks, Jim. As Jim said, we're going to have some great partners tabling at our June 4th event, including Preservation Connecticut. So you'll be able to continue the conversation in person. For now, if anyone feels like just popping their name and what community they're with or what organization they're with in the chat, a little intro in the chat, go ahead. And in the meantime, Stacy and Renee, I will hand it over to you to get started.
Great, thank you. I'm going to start sharing my screen, which is always nerve-wracking, right? Let's see. Is it going into the right mode? No? Yeah, here we go. Okay. Can y'all see that?
Yes, looks great.
Great. Okay, so thanks for joining us today for this coffee hour. Thanks for inviting us, Sustainable Connecticut. My name is Stacy Vero, and with me today is my colleague Renee Trevere, and we're both from Preservation Connecticut. Today we're going to be discussing the intersection of preservation and sustainability, and hopefully help you to maximize the points for action item 5.5, which is the task of inventorying and assessing historic resources. To start, we'd like to give you a little bit of information about our organization. For those of you who don't know, I see some familiar faces out there. So we're Preservation Connecticut, and we're the statewide nonprofit organization dedicated to the preservation of historic resources. We have a staff of 10 and a board of over 20 professionals who are all overseen by our executive director, Jane Montanaro, and deputy director, Chris Wiegren. We are statutory partners with the State Historic Preservation Office, which I'll be referring to and Renee will be referring to as the SHPO, and we work closely with them to promote their programs throughout the state. Renee works on a number of special projects, including the Survey of Industrial Properties and creative places related to 20th century artists. And currently she's organizing an update to a 1980s survey of historic theaters. I am one of a team of circuit riders who we work throughout the state. We kind of just problem solve all manner of historic preservation issues, ranging from threatened properties to giving advice to homeowners, just general advice. And our main job is connecting people to resources such as funding and specialty contractors. Our mission, as it states here, is to preserve, protect, and promote the buildings, sites, and landscapes that contribute to the heritage and vitality of Connecticut's diverse communities. And through the Circuit Rider program alone, annually, we visit about 250 sites to provide direct assistance. And as I mentioned, we work to catalog significant places such as barns, mills, town greens. We educate hundreds of people through our various programs like this one today. And finally, we hold about 42 permanent easements on properties throughout the state that Renee helps to review every year. Right now, some of you might be aware that there are some funding issues that are trickling down from the federal level. And preservation's in a little bit of a crisis. So the information that we're giving you today is true as we know it today, but may change in the future. We want you to be aware of that. So one thing that won't change is that our main job will be to advocate for historic resources. And our job will be to continue to help amplify local advocates and stand beside them as they advocate for the places that they care about the most. So to dive into the actual meat of the application, we're going to discuss how preservation can help strengthen your community from the perspective of sustainability. So with the application in mind, we're focusing on maximizing the number of points possible. We think we can get you to 50 points. And under 5.5, the action benefits that are listed currently are economic well-being, climate resilience, and community building. But we want to show you that embracing historic preservation practices can achieve most of those other action benefits that are available to you too. We're going to begin by defining historic preservation. This is on like an automatic, so I'm sorry, I'm going to be reversing every so often. Historic preservation is a way to identify and acknowledge the buildings, sites, objects, and structures that convey the history of a place, and that and the stories of the people who lived there in the past. It also is a way of protecting a community's most significant cultural and historical resources. So these are the other action benefits that we think we can help you achieve. They're not exactly part of this, but we think that historic preservation applies to pretty much all of them. It is all of them. And to begin, it's economic well-being. We think that the history and the character of a place are important to the economic well-being of a community. And it certainly drives tourism. If you think of places like Mystic or Litchfield, people want to work and live in a place that has character. Environmental impact. If this is a pretty straightforward one. If you keep a building standing, there's less construction debris going into landfills and less loss of embodied energy that was used to build that structure. Greenhouse gas reduction, again, related to the previous one. If you're keeping a building rather than creating a new one, there's less energy being put into the creation of that new structure and the transportation of new materials to that structure. Health and wellness. Old places can serve as sort of a psychological place for folks, provide a psychological benefit. They can be memory keepers. They can be identity markers. They're designs that are beautiful, and they're works of art in some cases. They express creativity. And historic urban developments were most often walkable communities because they were built before there were cars, so there wasn't an option. In terms of climate resilience, existing buildings can accommodate energy improvements while retaining historic character. So you can implement new technology like solar or geothermal or insulation. Buildings can be adapted to deal with sea level rise and flooding. So these are all things that can be woven into historic preservation. And in terms of cost savings, we're going to talk a little bit about how there are programs in place to help offset the cost of historic preservation. Community building. The character and shared history of old places fosters community pride. It's just a sort of an automatic thing. And equity, finally, equity. Existing buildings are, they pose opportunities for a variety of housing. So there can be low income housing, there can be senior housing, and they're often located in convenient locations. So people don't need other forms of transportation. So to get into sustainability a little bit further, sustainability practices are built into historic houses. They were often sited to take advantage of seasonal sun and wind patterns. Shade trees were planted to provide natural cooling to houses and to streets. And again, the idea of a walkable city is one that's part of just the development pattern of early, on which many early houses are built. Also the idea of like porches and rooms that can be closed off, all are a part of these early house plans. For owners of historic buildings, there are a number of resources that have been created. The first one that we'll talk about is the Connecticut Green Banks document, which is for historic homeowners, and that was created in conjunction with the Connecticut SHPO, and it provides a list of sustainable practices and how you can incorporate those into your historic house without losing the historic character or character defining features. So we have included a list of resources that we've given to the folks at Sustainable CT, and they can distribute after this program. And you can always contact us too for these resources. Also, the Park Service has created sustainability guidelines for rehabilitation of larger structures, and those can be found on the Park Service website. So in many cases, when we're working in historic preservation, the only thing that resonates with people is how much waste the loss of a historic building will produce. And there are lots of ways to calculate that, but one calculation is from FEMA, and they estimate that the loss or the demolition of a single average family home, which think of like a ranch with a basement, yields between 45 and 50 cubic yards of waste. That is 5 very large dumpsters. So we're talking about a tremendous amount of waste. So keeping buildings standing is always the sustainable option. And baked into sort of the laws that we work within, preservation law predates environmental law. So the National Historic Preservation Act was passed in 1966. It was the first environmental law. It was followed 3 years later by the National Environmental Policy Act. So, interwoven from the very beginning. So, economic benefits. As we mentioned, historic preservation is an integral part of economic development in places like Connecticut in particular. And SHPO is housed within the DECD, the Department of Economic and Community Development, for a reason, along with things like tourism and the arts. They all contribute to the economic health of Connecticut. And there are a number of studies that have been conducted to quantify the economic benefit of historic preservation. Place Economics is a group that is out of Washington, D.C. It is headed by Donovan Ripkema, who is an economist and preservationist. And in 2011, they completed 2 studies for Connecticut. The first one was focused on rehabilitations of disused buildings, and that were part of a tax credit program. And the second focused on local historic districts. So studies show that in the case of the rehabilitations, that they created more jobs than new builds. They required specialized craftsmen who were often taken from the local community, and overall created more work and boosted the economy more than new builds. In terms of local historic district values, the studies found that home values in local historic districts were preserved or slightly elevated rather than diminished, which is a common talking point against inclusion in local historic districts. So to get into how we think we can help you more easily achieve the 10 points of assessing historic resources in your community, we want to bring to your attention what already is out there, and an easy way to sort of get at those. So you can see in the bottom right-hand corner that there is a map, and that map shows all of the properties that are inventoried. They're included in historic and architectural resource inventories, all of the state register listed properties, all the national register properties, and all the local district properties. And we're going to talk a little bit about each one of those and tell you how you can just basically download that and you have your full inventory of historic assets. So when we talk about inventories, those are town-wide typically, and they are the first step in historic preservation. Inventories gather all of the information about what is out there and then typically give recommendations for historic designations. They include properties that are architecturally significant, historically significant, or that may be threatened. And again, they give recommendations for state and national register districts. You can find out if your town has a survey by going to Congress, or most of the town surveys have been compiled at the Dodd Center at UConn. And again, we've included a lot of these resources for you. There should also be a local hard copy of a survey in either your library or at the town clerk. So funding is available to update the surveys. Many of these date from the 1980s. You might be able to tell from the sort of yellowed pages that are up there that this one is quite old, but there is funding available currently to update your town surveys. And I also, in looking through all of the different ways that people were able to compile historic resources, did find that some communities went to their plan of conservation and development and looked at the listings there. Those can be a little bit broader, and they can include things like parks and stone walls. So that is another option. But conversely, when you have these lists of resources, you can help your town inform the future plan of conservation and development. So it's sort of a win-win. To talk a little bit about the National Register, we're going to talk about the 3 different types of listings now, because those all can be compiled and used as well if you don't have a survey for whatever reason. The National Register of Historic Places is an honorary listing. It does not restrict the use of a property or what a person can do to the property unless there are state or federal funds that are being used to complete those changes, right? If federal funds are used, there is a review process that is triggered. It's called Section 106. It's part of the National Historic Preservation Act. It's been in place for many years, since 1966. And what it is a public process. So it invites public comment into whatever the project is. And we've included here an image of the Citizen's Guide to Section 106. If you're an active part of your community, you should be aware of this document and make use of it because you are most likely a stakeholder in the historic preservation review process. And also, if a property is listed on the National Register, they are protected to a certain degree under a state law called the Connecticut Environmental Protection Act. And what that does is it protects nationally registered listed properties from unreasonable destruction. It's a process. It can be quite long, but it's one way of protecting properties. And I think we're using an older version of this presentation, Renee. So I'm going to switch over when I switch it to you, but I'm struggling through using some of the older slides. So anyway, we have Jenny Schofield here, who is she's the National Register coordinator, and Jenny Schofield is the person who you would contact to deal with any questions directly related to the National Register. I'm also more than willing to answer any questions related to National Register listings. But if I couldn't answer them, I'd direct them to Jenny. So we've included her information here. So the State Register of Historic Places is another thing that you should be aware of. Anything that's listed on the National Register is immediately and automatically listed on the State Register as part of the process. This can help you in completion of action item 5.52, which is the assessment of historic resources, because the State Register is really the threshold for funding. It provides you access to those grants that could fund these studies, and Renee will get into that a little bit more later. Again, it's an honorary designation. There are no restrictions for owners, but there are some differences. The property doesn't have to be 50 years of age, and it can have been moved, which is a good thing. But again, the person who you would contact is Marina Wisniewski at the State Historic Preservation Office for any specific questions related to the State Register. And local historic districts. So local historic districts are overseen by a historic district commission, typically. You can also have a single local historic property. So you need to have at least one local historic property or district to become a CLG, which is another action item that we'll talk about later. So these are established by the local municipality through what's called a study report. They need to be approved by a 2/3 majority of property owners, and the HDC, or the Historic District Commission, is guided by a municipal ordinance, and owners within these districts, they need to get a certificate of appropriateness to complete any significant work on the exterior that would be visible from a public way. This is one of the best ways to protect local resources. And it should be, we should note that prior to 2018, any property that's listed on a local historic district was also listed on a state register, on the state register. So there's a lot of overlap in these types of districts, but they are very different, and that should be noted. So before I turn this over to Renee, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to let you. Renee, do you want to share directly from your computer? Is that the easiest way to do it? Or do you want me to share?
Let's see. Yeah, let me.
Nothing significantly changed in the presentation, just so you know. It's just some talking points that I don't want to mess you up by using this one. So.
Okay. Let's see. Share screen, folks. Sorry, bear with me. We hadn't really talked about this.
Sorry about this.
No problem at all.
Where are my? Sorry, folks. Share screen. Okay. All right, here we go. So, so I'm going to pick up with some of the additional benefits of listing on the state or national register of historic places that are maybe outside of the Sustainable Connecticut Action Rubric for historic properties, but that also support sustainable maintenance and use of existing buildings. When once listed, rehab projects or repair and maintenance at historic properties may qualify for state and/or federal historic tax credits. Or for municipalities and nonprofits, they may be eligible for matching grants. When buildings and structures already have a designation, it is often an incentive for developers who are interested in rehab. The historic tax credits can be an important part of balancing pro formas. And so knowing that a property is listed reduces their uncertainty and streamlines their evaluation for project viability. So that's a sort of positive and encouraging that reuse. Zoning overlays, as you know, working with them, they're often created to limit or identify and encourage certain types of development activity in particular areas of town. Historic and heritage overlays may do things like accept reductions in per unit parking requirements, or allow certain new uses as of right to streamline the permitting process for potential reuse, say as affordable residential housing, or even offer tax abatement on long vacant properties. So all of these tools may stimulate the reuse or adaptive use of historic buildings, which also achieves some of your sustainable goals, such as keeping growth within existing dense areas. Action 5.5.2, perform assessment and study report. So Stacy spoke to this a little bit. The variety of assessments performed under Action 5.5.2 can all help municipalities position old buildings for continued investment and sustainable use for years to come. Pre-development surveys can help tee buildings up for rehab by outside developers or partners by identifying the work that may be necessary, and some work that can be undertaken by the municipality in advance to prepare a property for continued or new uses. Condition assessments can identify steps to address potential concerns, anything from, building envelope, roofing, that kind of issue, to structural issues. And one of the things that we often hear in preservation is, oh, that building's going to fall down, it's an old building. But the reality is that many of these buildings were really well built and are structurally much stabler and stronger than folks realize. So sometimes condition assessments can help to kind of recognize that. As already mentioned, matching grants may be available to underwrite these reports if the properties are listed on the state or national register, or if the municipality is a CLG. And I'll get a little more into CLGs in just a moment. So completion of this action is worth 10 points, but I think, as you know, you can actually do this for up to 3 resources. So you can accumulate 30 points. Action 5.5.3 is for sponsoring or hosting an educational public event. Now, Preservation Connecticut and the State Historic Preservation Office, both independently and cooperatively, offer educational programs and workshops on all kinds of topics throughout the year. And both offices coordinate with municipalities that may be requesting training sessions on particular preservation questions or concerns. So such a program could give you 5 points towards the action. And examples of preservation-related programming include local historic district workshop for commissioners and homeowners, tax credit workshops, National Register listing public meetings, Preservation 101, which presents sort of the basics of preservation for homeowners or owners of commercial or institutional historic buildings, technical preservation training, think window workshops and that kind of thing, as well as regional training sessions and workshops for groups of communities. Action 5.5.4 is your Achieve CLG status action for your community. The CLG program is a partnership between local, state, and federal governments. And CLG status means that your municipality has actively committed to preservation of local historic buildings, landscapes, and community character. Steps in the process include establishing a district commission and local ordinance to protect, designate and protect historic properties in a local historic district or as a local historic property, and participation in the National Register listing process. Conducting property surveys to identify individual or districts for listing, and public presentations and hearings. So again, matching and non-matching funds are available to CLGs, and this is a layer, sort of an additional layer, if you will, to programs that are available just to nonprofits and municipalities otherwise, from the SHPO office. And they include the Historic Preservation Enhancement Grant Program, which is actually federally funded, and Connecticut's supplemental CLG grant program, which is state funding. And Mary Dunn is at SHPO is the contact for those programs. So we kind of wanted to remind you or point out that preservation-related activities can be a part of or contribute to other sustainable CT action items that you might be, looking at. So, for example, Action 2.1, support redevelopment of brownfields. Well, existing historic buildings, or even just existing buildings, may sometimes be an integral part of remedial plans, acting as a barrier between people and soil contamination, for example. So they have a value in that context beyond just being a wonderful historic building. And they can add then to that sustainable, aspect of redevelopment of brownfields. Action 3.8, implement low impact development. Reusing existing buildings means less debris goes to landfill, as we've already talked about. There are fewer energy losses from the production and transportation of new materials. And there may be less development pressure on a nearby vacant land, for example, because you're keeping it all in existing buildings. Action 4.1, inventory tourism and cultural assets. Kind of old and historic community structures may already be assets in this way, and will be reflected, it's reflected in your local surveys. Action 5.6, streamline solar permitting for small installations. And as Stacy mentioned, old and historic structures can frequently accommodate solar arrays or geothermal or a variety of energy efficiency accommodations. A great example is the Marcel Hotel in New Haven. Action 6.5, promote public transit and other mobility strategies. Well, historic structures are often located in downtown areas or maybe village clusters, and their continued or adaptive use will contribute to kind of the convenient access to existing transportation and the existing kind of walkability of communities. Action 11, healthy and efficient and affordable housing plan. Again, existing buildings, both large and small, can be opportunities for housing, including affordable housing. We've seen large mill buildings transformed into apartments, and they typically include a number of affordable and workforce units. We've seen Victorian homes turned into housing with a smaller number of units, but maybe a new construction attached, say on the backside, that fits in with the existing landscape. So you can be thinking about preservation when you're thinking about achieving some of your other sustainable actions. We have examples of achieving Action 5.5 implementation, as well as partners that you might look at. So you can seek out the advice of communities that have successfully achieved the points under Action 5.5, or you can offer to share your experience and how you are reaching the Action 5.5 goals. Either way, you may wind up learning more about historic preservation in another community and approaches to achieving points. And you may also, through that collaboration, be effectively kind of adding to your ability to achieve points under Action 8.5. There are more than 45 examples of Action 5.5 successes across the state, and you can find them at the bottom of that pop-out page. Vernon, for example, has gotten 35 points by identifying their historic assets, doing condition assessment, and having education opportunities for historic property owners. Darien, same thing, 35 points. They achieved CLG status and updated their historic resources section of their POCD, Plan of Conservation and Development. You probably all know that. Old Saybrook, 45 points, getting close to the max here, with their resources inventory, meeting CLG status, and assessing viability of 3 historic resources. And an important point here that Stacy was referring to is that you can look, even if a survey was done in years past, you can still include that towards your points, your action points. So there are partners, non-municipal partners and stakeholders out there that can help you with guidance and assistance in achieving your Action 5.5 goals. Your local historic society will often have information on historic buildings in your town. Your local preservation organizations will advocate for historic structures and maybe be able to inform you on approaches for some of your historic resource actions. And of course, SHPO and Preservation Connecticut staff are always available to help and offer guidance and talk through things as best we can. So with that, as we've mentioned, we did create a list of resources that'll get sent out. But now we're happy to field any questions that you may have. So let me unshare.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Stacy. That was awesome. I feel like I just learned so much, and really appreciate your discussion of how preservation and sustainability are so integrated. Yeah, anyone who has any questions, or feel free to come off mute and ask, or if you would like to put it in the chat, we can read your questions. I see Cheryl, you have your hand raised, so go ahead, Cheryl.
Thanks. Thank you so much for opening up this conversation in terms of historic preservation and the environment. I'm not as familiar with the sustainable CT numbering, so I'm glad that you were able to talk about that. Some questions I have about how can municipalities strengthen the 90-day delay ordinance and actually do something as a result? Often what happens is the 90-day delay comes and goes, and then this beautiful building is destroyed. And along with that, I'm curious what you think about strengthening ordinances with deconstruction in addition, so that you may not be able to preserve the building, but could you preserve some of the fixtures or some of the historic nature of it if you can't protect the entire building?
That's a great question. Renee, do you want to handle it, or you want me to take it? What do you think?
Well, yeah, do you want to start with it? I'm going to look up deconstruction because I feel like we have I think that we have a model deconstruction ordinance, but let me look. Yep. Go.
So it's a timely question. We were literally just talking about this at our staff meeting before we got on this meeting today. So it's pretty funny that you asked that. We have been working with a number of communities to not only strengthen the demo delay, but to expand it. So for instance, in Wilton, I know they're investigating the idea of expanding 90 days to 180 days, because having that additional time does allow, and I've seen this in practice, to investigate other alternatives like deconstruction, and to find the right person, the right salvage person to do that properly, and to keep as many of the elements intact and able to be reused. So one way we can help during that period, I mean, written into the demo delay ordinance is the idea that either the SHPO or other stakeholders will help in the process. So when there's a delay, there's a delay that's built into the local historic district ordinance, right? And that specifically named SHPO as a partner in helping to do something with the building. And we take that further out into any of the other ordinances that may be townwide. So, call us and see if there's anything we can do. We do have a historic preservation exchange, a historic house exchange. So we can list a property on our website. We can try to get more traction. We can try to see if anyone is interested in buying that property to move off site. Moving is very expensive and often not possible, particularly because of power lines and things like that. That tends to be the highest cost of moving, but there are other options, and they're not always the best option, but deconstruction is one of them. So preservation encompasses a sustainable aspect, and that does mean deconstruction in some cases.
Just to add something to that, one of the things that we sometimes can try and do, depending upon the type of building that is threatened, is that we can sort of see if we can get parties interested in maybe redevelopment of the property as is, if the owner is willing. I mean, there are all sorts of obviously considerations there. But so when you do, if you do encounter that kind of situation and it's a building that may lend itself, let's say, to commercial use, and by commercial, that could include like rental apartments, for example, you can reach out and we'll try and see if among the solutions that Stacy was talking about, if there's the possibility that it might be something that a developer could be interested in, because it has happened. I mean,
yeah, I've heard of people, they find out about the demolition and they're trying to work on the 90-day, not realizing an RFP already went out about the demolition. So literally on day 91, the demo begins. That there isn't even just like a pause, which to me gives great concern, not only from, the environmental aspect of it, but the historic nature. The other thing I want to mention to folks that are also interested in deconstruction, I know Portland, Oregon, I believe San Antonio, Texas, and also Milwaukee have local ordinances. And I noticed somebody put something about 1970s houses. Oregon says if your house is older than 1940, because of course they're different than the East Coast, that you actually have to have it considered for deconstruction because of the historical nature. So it would be great as you're looking at ordinances to maybe think about the years and whether or not there's something, I'm not a building expert, but something from a historic nature that there would be a year threshold specifically for Connecticut to preserve buildings of a certain age. When you talk to the lumber guys, they talk, they say that, cherry's gone forever unless we deconstruct it. So thank you for talking about this issue.
That's a great point. And when we are talking about the repair of historic buildings and why you should keep your historic building rather than maybe re-siding it or taking, wood windows out, the idea of these older materials being repairable is so crucial. The idea of being able to repair wood or sand wood. You can't sand AZAC, so it's one of those things where we're trying to just inform people that maybe, as you say, 1970s construction materials really don't add up, and that idea of putting the dates into the ordinances is a great one. Though there are some buildings from the 70s that are interesting too. I do want to mention them. So
we have a comment in the chat from Jody, who's asked about a council member in their municipality, asked by a council member about shortening that timeline for low quality construction of buildings from the 70s. So Jody, I wonder if you have anything else to say about that, or Renee or Stacy, how you would respond.
So I think when you're talking about 60 days, say you shorten it from 90 days to 60 days, that's probably what they're talking about. If you're talking about 60 days and you have meetings that have to take place at the municipal level, you miss one meeting, you're out of luck, right? I mean, it's too short of a timeline to really do anything actionable. And that extra time is so crucial, even for buildings that are maybe built in the 1970s, right? Because you don't know if there's some sort of history. History's a continuum, and there may have been something very important that happened there. And you just want to be able to know. You just want to, before you lose it. Not every 1970s building should be saved. You know, preservation isn't like keep everything, you know, but you do want to be able to have the time to investigate it. In certain circumstances, you know, maybe there's an agreement, there's some language or something that could be worked out with local stakeholders to investigate the building, and in which case they can maybe sign off on it, and then they can proceed with the demolition, you know, and that process does sort of happen internally in some communities that I know of. So, you know, I think having an open line of communication, having municipalities that are informed about historic preservation is really the key, you know, so that they're well aware of all of the potential losses that could take place beyond just the building itself, you know, when you lose something.
And also two things that I think I'd like to follow up on that. And one is a reminder that who is it? I think one of our SHPO staff says, you know, preservation is not necessarily pretty, which is to say, you know, you can't always judge a book by its cover. There are, for example, you know, when you're looking at, you know, African American communities where there's been history, sometimes perhaps those you know, buildings have been in poorer communities that may not have had the ability to maintain, or maybe they weren't able, you know, we're not talking about mansions or, you know, some beautiful architecture. That doesn't mean they don't have some local significance. So that's just a reminder about that it's not just the building as an artwork, if you will. It's the whole history, as Stacy was talking about. And the other thing that I did just want to throw out is that what we also provide, staff are happy to try and provide, I say provide, but try to, when you've gotten to a point where it seems that demolition is inevitable, there are folks out there that will salvage. You know, it doesn't, they're not always interested, but we can try and give you contacts to help with that if that outcome is inevitable. So.
Thanks. We have another question in the chat. Actually, two questions in the chat, and I see one hand raised. So just in the chat, Dorothy asked about the Circuit Riders program, how people can connect with it, and if that program might be useful for municipalities or historic commissions that want to promote it to building owners who might need a little bit more technical assistance to help preserve their structures. And then I think kind of a related question from Cheryl, any examples of ordinance language that addresses or requires building owners providing upkeep to their buildings so they don't become in disrepair and like leading to eventually being demolished.
So I'll take the question about the Circuit Riders. Jordan, I think, put into the chat the Circuit Riders site visit form, so you can request a site visit there. You also can reach out directly to me at the email that was included in this presentation. Happy to talk with you. So there are 4 of us, and we're all happy to come out and meet with you. We cover the entire state. What we do is we just sort of evaluate each incoming request, and we figure out who would best be suited to meet that request. So the form's the best way to do it, but you also can just reach out directly. And in terms of the second question, ordinance language requires building owners to be. So that's really a blight issue, right? Is that what we're talking about here? Like trying to keep blight at bay as part of the local historic district ordinance. There are ordinances that are in place for prevention of blight. They're not specifically tied to historic resources, to my knowledge. We've looked into this a little bit. It's an area of study we want to continue further. Renee, do you have anything?
So the one thing I will say is that I know if you look at Torrington, so Torrington, the Yankee Peddler Inn, they were able to, it's a new, I'm sorry, I don't have it off the top of my head, but there was a new enabling statute so that the municipalities could actually, if the blight notices were not, you know, after a certain period, and you'll have to look this up, but that the municipality can actually assume control. So Torrington and the Yankee Peddler Inn is the case study to look at for that. Slightly, you know, different, but kind of the same idea. And the other thing that I wanted to mention in the context of the circuit riders and sort of helping people with, you know, promoting to building owners who may need more technical assistance. We do also, so I'm not a circuit rider, but Jordan and I also do talk to developers and talk to property owners about listing or about tax credits or about, you know, what the things that they can do. We try and provide guidance on how they might go about rehabbing, repairing, maintaining whatever a building, what sources there are out there, who they need to talk to, what the process involves, what they need to do. So circuit riders, I think, can do that as well, but that's something that we also do, Jordan and I do as well.
Great, thanks. Michelle, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. My question, I work for the city of Norwalk, and the city has thought about applying to be a certified local government and going down that process to designate a local district. Is there any advice on doing research prior to applying to any grants to help us with that process? As I understand, the statute does require that district to have a vote at the end of residents and everything. So getting that public buy-in prior to like all this work that we do, is there kind of like a footprint of what that looks like, or what kind of like preemptive work we should do then going down that road?
So my understanding is that you can have a local historic property that is overseen by a commission too. So you can only have one property if you'd like to start to get your CLG status rolling. And then from that, you can potentially have access to non-matching grants down the road. So that's one avenue of investigation, is just using that local historic property rather than a whole district. So you're only dealing with one. The other is to sort of just send around a postcard and poll people. And we're happy to go out and inform people about what it means to be in a local historic district. So, you know, that's something that we're happy to partner with you on. Please reach out. We're happy to do that along with Mary Dunn. And we can help you through the whole study report process, which would involve informing the owners. We're doing that now in a number of communities. So we're happy to do that with you. So
Gotcha.
yeah.
Thanks. And then if you do choose to have one kind of start maybe with one property, is there a certain criteria that, because Norwalk has like a lot of valuable historic homes, so is there a recommendation of like where to start, or if like what would be a good eligible property?
Well, you can even choose one already listed municipally owned property, you know, to start with. It can really be anything, as long as you're with a historic district commission overseeing the changes that take place to that building. That's really the key. So it can be even, yeah, a municipally owned building if you'd like.
Thank you.
Thanks. It's almost 11, so I think maybe we have time for one more quick question if anyone has any last. Cheryl, go ahead.
Mine's an offshoot. So in terms of applying, it sounds like you need at least one building. Can cemeteries also help with an application? Can a cemetery be considered part of a historic district?
The local.
It can be.
Yeah, I'm just,
It can be.
it has
but-
nothing to do with the environment, but I'm just sort of curious because yeah.
Yeah, no, they've been included in local historic districts in the past. I wouldn't,
Oh, they
you
have.
know,
Okay.
yeah, they have. Um, I think maybe more of is like an overlap because local historic districts and national register districts tend to overlap. I wouldn't hang my hat on a cemetery because the ordinance really is written for buildings, you know, but they
Okay.
can be included within districts and have been in the past. But I wouldn't make it the centerpiece necessarily. They certainly can be listed on the state and national register. So that's something to
Just
keep in.
curious. Thank
Yeah.
you. Sorry for the offshoot there. Thanks.
That's what the discussion's for. Offshoot questions are great. I think, yeah, so we're just about out of time. Thank you so much, Stacy and Renee, for joining and for speaking today. This was great. Thank you, Jordan, for being so quick with the links in the chat. Sustainable CT will follow up with a link to the recording and also a great link of or list of resources that Renee and Stacy put together to share. Yeah, thank you all so much and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we're always available